Thank you. Please be seated. Please stand for the jury. Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Mr. Nurmi, you may give your closing argument.
Fear, love, sex, lies, and dirty little secrets. These aspects of the human condition may not be universal, but they were, and each one of these aspects of the human condition played a prominent role in the relationship that Jodi Arias shared with Travis Alexander. The relationship that began in the fall of 2006 when Mr. Alexander met Jodi Arias at a prepaid legal convention in Las Vegas. And the relationship that ended tragically on June 4th, 2008. And because these aspects of the human condition played such a prominent role in this relationship, it makes sense that the evidence that you've heard starting on January 2nd is a tale of fear, love, sex, lies, and dirty little secrets. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one of the other things we told you at the beginning of this trial was that ultimately your job would be to determine one thing. Your job would be to determine what happened. You were read some jury instructions yesterday that you were the finder of fact. What happened? What happened in the minutes in time between what we see here in Exhibit 159, June 4th, 2008, 5:29 and 20 seconds. What happened between what we see in this photograph and what we see in Exhibit 162? Mr. Alexander's body being drugged across the bathroom floor at 5:32 and 16 seconds. What happened in those 3 minutes is ultimately what you are to decide. Is this 3 minutes in time? Is this a culmination of a plot, a plan that Jodi Arias hatched in May of 2008, in which she was going to go from her grandparents' home in Wairika, California, to Travis Alexander's home so she could kill him? Was it what the state said it was yesterday? Was it this plan? Or was it an act of self-defense forced upon Miss Arias by the actions of Mr. Alexander? Or was it something else? That is ultimately what your job is to determine. Fear, love, sex, lies, and dirty little secrets will help you understand, I think, what happened in those 3 minutes. And as you begin, and we've seen certainly aspects of fear throughout the course of this trial, right? And we'll talk about that more later, but it occurred to me as I began thinking about talking to you this morning that you may have some fear. You've been listening to evidence for 12 weeks now, more than 12 weeks, since January 2nd. And you may feel, maybe I forgot something. Maybe I didn't understand a crucial piece of evidence. Maybe when I get back to deliberate, my fellow jurors will not feel the same way that I do about this case. They won't see things the same way. Maybe you fear how your verdict will be received.
Objection. The proper argument.
Approach.
You may fear how your verdict will be received by those who love Travis Alexander, by those who love Jodi Arias, or by the world at large. But ladies and gentlemen, as the jury instructions that were read to you yesterday indicate, your job in determining what happened between these 3 minutes in time is to do an objective analysis of the facts and evidence presented to you. You are not to be guided by sympathy or prejudice or fear, but instead by your personal belief. And rest assured, each and every one of you are here because all the parties involved believe that you are the type of people that would have the courage of your convictions to stand by your personal belief against whatever pressures you may feel. Each one of you is entitled to deliver your verdict to this courtroom. You do not have to succumb to the pressure of a fellow juror who may not agree with you. You can have the courage of your conviction to deliver your own verdict. You are to have the courage of conviction to deliver your own verdict based on the evidence you've heard. Nothing more. Nothing more. You are asked to put that fear aside and look at the evidence. At the evidence. And before we talk about the evidence and what this case is about, I think it's important to talk about what this case is not about. It's not about Snow White. It's not even about any of the 7 dwarfs. It's not about bad haircuts. And it's not about the sexual orientation of any of the witnesses.
Objection. Arguing facts not evidence.
It's not even about whether or not you like Jodi Arias. 9 days out of 10, I don't like Jodi Arias.
Objection.
But that-
Arguing his belief.
Sustained.
That's the fact statement.
Yes.
It is directed to disregard the last statement.
But that doesn't matter. Your liking her or not liking her does not objectively assess the evidence. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? It's not even about her sitting before the cameras of Inside Edition and saying that no jury will convict her. It's not about that. It's about the evidence. What happened? What happened between what we see in Exhibit 159 and what we see in Exhibit 162? Well, I guess you know there's one more thing this case isn't about. Remember we heard that charge of felony murder yesterday and the state making an argument that was incomprehensible? This idea that, well, if you believe Jodi's version of events, she's guilty of felony murder because she went to Travis's home and she decided to steal his gun. And in the course of trying to steal his gun, she shot him. She went there, they had sex, they did all these things, then she decided she wanted his gun and decided to take it. And wanted it so bad that she was willing to kill him. That's the theory of felony murder they have put forward. That shows a little fear, and we'll talk about some of the fear that the state has demonstrated throughout this case. But that's just some of it, right? We also heard this idea that, well, she was unwelcome once she put the weapon upon him and she was there to commit a burglary or another felony. There's no other felony. Ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing. It's silly. It's fearful. That charge is there out of fear. It makes no sense. Under any scenario does that make any sense. Either she was there to kill him because the state said, hey, this is a plot that began in May. Either she was there to kill him or it wasn't, or she wasn't. And that's ultimately what we're here to determine. Now, what is this case about? Well, as we just spoke of and just mentioned, yesterday, the state says to you that in May of 2008, Jodi Arias came up with a plan. Now, they pointed to a couple different days yesterday. Pointed to May 19th, the day that Miss Arias had a conversation with Miss Housley that she was fearful, or excuse me, that Mr. Alexander was fearful of Jodi. Of course, on May 10th, we heard that they had a phone sex conversation. And on May 26th, we heard this conversation, we heard bits of this, or questions about this conversation, in which Mr. Alexander had called Miss Arias a whore, a slut, and a three-hole wonder. And the state theorizes at some point in time here in late May, I guess, Jodi Arias decides that Travis Alexander, what we heard yesterday was that he had finally decided to end the relationship and she couldn't deal with it. Well, let's start there. Because what you're going to see as it relates to this so-called plan is it doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense at all. And the first place it doesn't make any sense is the very premise of why. Now, the state doesn't have to prove motive, but they've come up with this motive so we can discuss it. Why? Because she couldn't live without Travis Alexander. Right? She's crazy. She can't break up with any of her boyfriends. She can't let it go. She couldn't live without Travis Alexander. All right, that's the theory. That's the motivation. That's why she starts this plan into action. Except for the fact that, remember, in May of 2008, she had moved back to Wairika, California to get away from Travis Alexander. To get away. She didn't want to be around him anymore. She talked in her journals about how the cloud had lifted, right? These journals that were later argued to be incomplete, and we'll talk about that more later. There's no rules of journaling, but the state has submitted that to you, so we'll discuss it. But point of fact is, she moved away. This girl is supposedly obsessed, moves away. They still talk on the phone, but she moved away. What else is she doing? We heard evidence that she had an account on LDS Linka, a Mormon dating site. She was a young Mormon woman in her mid-20s, much like probably a lot of the people on that website, who was looking for someone who shared their philosophical beliefs. Now, the state has tried to cast aspersions on that, but ultimately, a lot of people use these sites, and Jodi was using them. She wasn't so locked in on Travis that she wasn't looking for other men. And then we met one of those other guys, right? Ryan Burns. He sat there right before you. She began conversating with him. Phone, text messages, and they had planned to meet. She was interested in moving on, moving past Travis Alexander. So this whole idea to begin with of why this plan was put into place. This plan would have been masterminded, right, in May of 2008. Because for this very reason. Now, the reason doesn't make any sense. Okay. What next doesn't make sense? Well, the state tells you that in order to effectuate this plan she's conjured up to kill Travis Alexander. But once this plan is conjured up, what does she need? She needs a way to shoot him, right? Way to kill him. So the state says she orchestrated a theft. A theft of a gun. Now, in Exhibit 325, we see this so-called gun cabinet, this impenetrable force. We also see this in 326, the same gun cabinet. Now, I would say to you, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, that if she wanted a weapon and this is the weapon she wanted, for whatever reason, keep in mind this is a .25 caliber gun, a very weak gun. But if she wanted this weapon, and she was going to leave and go to Mesa on a covert mission with a single-minded purpose to kill Travis Alexander, and that's what we're talking about here. She could have just reached her hand in there the day she was leaving and taken that gun. We never know whether it would be discovered missing or not. There would be no police report. There would be no evidence. Nothing. The other thing is, what we heard, is that Jodi, when she was in Wairika, she didn't live with her parents, but they were there. And one of the bits of evidence you heard was that Jodi's father owned guns that were not registered. She could have got one from Dad. Probably a more powerful gun. But she didn't, right? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you, first of all, why would you stage this burglary? Right? This burglary that the state wants you to believe is so suspicious. Why would she stage this when she could just reach in and get it or get a gun from another source? You know where else she could have got a gun? We heard about Matt McCartney, the friend that wouldn't betray her as the state tried to portray so much on the cross-examination of Jodi Arias. He had guns too. She stopped in Monterey, but no, he didn't get a gun there either. Would have been untraced. Would have been no sign of it. But under this concocted theory that she orchestrated this theft, she breaks in herself, steals money, a DVD player, and this .22 caliber gun. And it creates a police report and it creates a trail. Would that be a choice? And keep in mind, the state conceded yesterday that Jodi Arias is a smart woman. Is that behavior consistent with a smart woman who is planning this covert mission? Keep in mind, it's covert, very important. That's what the state said yesterday. Covert mission to go to Mesa, Arizona and kill Travis Alexander. Why would you start a trail? The type of gun, the bullets, everything. It doesn't make any sense. Why would she do that? So now, we have two nonsensical propositions. Why she would want to kill Travis Alexander and how she obtained the weapon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the nonsense kind of continues from there. Because, of course, what else would she need to go on this covert mission to Mesa, Arizona? Well, she needs a way to get to Mesa, Arizona, right? Well, we heard one thing. She owned a car. Could have drove it to Mesa, Arizona. Now, we heard that maybe it wasn't in the best mechanical shape. And, as the state could theorize, maybe it would have been recognized. All right? Okay. So she's in Wairika, California. She needs a car. Of course, who's up in Wairika, California again? Her mother, her father, her sister, and her grandparents. All with cars. She could have exchanged cars. She could have come up with some reason. I'm going on a road trip. Can I take your car? None of it. None of those actions would have caused there to be any sort of paper trail, right? You borrow your mom's car, you go on a long trip, no paper trail. You borrow your dad's car, you go on a long trip, no paper trail. Those people, those same people, mother, father, they also could have rented a car for Jodi Arias, right? Nothing linking it to her, but does she do that? Does this smart woman who's planning this covert mission, does she do that? No, she doesn't. And the state theorizes that she didn't rent a car in in Wairika, California, did it instead in Redding, California, because she didn't want to be recognized in Wairika. But she hadn't lived there for years, number one. And number two, Redding, she was with her brother, and at that time, his fiance. So there were witnesses to her being in Redding, California. And the other issue is this choice she made to rent a car at Redding, as if it would somehow be covert that way. No one will recognize me. That's the theory, right? No one will recognize me. No one will know. But what does she have to do? You don't go to budget rent a car, plop down a couple $100s, and drive off with their car. Car rentals don't work that way. You gave a driver's license and a credit card information. There's a pretty clear paper trail as to what took place when she went to the Redding airport. And keep in mind, too, I think that's important. She went to an airport. An airport with security cameras and security all around. An airport, not some rental car agency on the outskirts of town, right? An airport. Doesn't make any sense if you're on a covert mission. Now, let's take a look at this paper trail. What does Miss Arias do to get this car, right? Exhibit 235, there's various receipts. She puts her initials. She signs her name. Paper trail. Not very covert so far. Not at all. Now, adding to this level of nonsense again, and this kind of gets into lying as well, this idea that, well, Jodi didn't really reserve the car online at Priceline, as she said. She lied to you. She really did it at budget. But let's take a look at these receipts here. Or the bank statement. She got the car. When did she get the car? She got the car in June. Right? As she was getting ready to go on this trip. She gets the car in early June, right? June 2nd. She gets the car. She returns the car on June 9th. June 9th, 2008. You were shown yesterday what is Exhibit 523. And we see the charge there for the car rental. Budget rent-a-car, right? Whoops. Yep, budget rent-a-car. Now the state says, well, looky here, you see, there was a price line charge for airfare, and that happened right away, and therefore she's lying. But let's face the facts here. That $233.97 that you see up there, that was charged when she returned the car. Airfare and car rentals are different. Under these times, we know that when we purchase airfare, you have your common experience. You've rented a car or purchased airfare. You realize that, well, you do that. When you buy a plane ticket, you have to give all your identifying information and you pay for it. When you rent a car, oftentimes you reserve a car and pay for it when you're done. You put a deposit down on the credit card, you pay for it when it's done. That's when she paid for it. Now, the state has tried to argue that that's a lie. That Miss Arias is lying. She didn't use Priceline. Those people at Priceline aren't getting their money, right? And this is certainly one thing the state has done as it relates to lies. Jodi Arias has made some lies about what happened. So then, why not just pile on? Set up a house of cards and in a scenario where they say Jodi's lying and knock it down. But here's the thing, she wasn't lying. There's no evidence that she was lying. We don't know what kind of arrangement Budget and Priceline has. Mr. Colombo, he didn't tell you what kind of arrangement they have. He didn't know. So she rents this car. And Mr. Colombo says when she rented the car, her hair was blonde. And we had some discussions of hair color. But it wasn't, right? We saw the pictures. Mr. Colombo saw her driver's license. Jodi Arias had blonde hair when she had her driver's license picture. But you saw pictures, right? We saw a picture 413, Exhibit 413, taken on May 10th, 2008. And no one tried to have an expert testify and say this is a certain color hair. You can look at it. You can look at your own judgment. We may have different shades of brown. We have Exhibit 414. And Exhibit 414 was taken on May 15th. Jodi and her parents' dog, May 15th. You judge for yourself. May 17th, Exhibit 415. Judge for yourself. Is that some sort of bright blonde hair? Okay. What else is at the car rental agency? We have this issue. Jodi wanted a white car instead of a red car, because the red car would draw the cops' attention. Well, some of us have heard that myth as it relates to speeding tickets. Maybe it's a myth, maybe it's not. But with everything else, so far we have nothing that makes sense about a covert mission, right? Nothing. The difference between a white car and a red car isn't going to be the difference between being found and not found, being discovered and not discovered. And there's many things we can talk about in that regard. But that doesn't make any sense either, that that's a big deal. Okay. Now you would think, ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't you, that if somebody was on a covert mission, right, and now we're at June 2nd, she's in Reading, she's got the car. And under the state's theory, she has the car, she's got the gun. She's ready to rock, right? So does she then go from Reading, California to Mesa, Arizona, nonstop, in order to go on this covert mission to kill Travis Alexander. You don't stop anywhere, you don't visit any people, there's no witnesses. You go in there clean and you do your business, right? Did she do that? Oh, no, she didn't. Doesn't make any sense. What does she do? She stops in Monterey, California. What does she do in Monterey, California? She visits 2 former boyfriends. This crazy woman who can't let it go has friendships with 2 of her former boyfriends, Matt McCartney and Daryl Brewer. And she had a relationship with Daryl's son because they were together so long. So she had breakfast with Daryl and his son and spent some time at a karaoke bar with Matt McCartney. So what she had done, if she's on this covert mission, is it's not quite so covert anymore now, is it? We've alerted the world to this gun theft. We've alerted the world to the rental car. And we've alerted the world to where we're going or the presence. And then Daryl Brewer says, well, she told me she was going to Mesa. I needed gas cans. Well, if this was a covert mission, first of all, and I would submit to you he was probably mistaken about Mesa. She did go there. But whether or not she was planning on going there or not. But think about it. If this was a covert mission, would you say to your ex-boyfriend, can I borrow a couple gas cans and I'm going to Mesa? Doesn't make any sense. So the nonsensical nature of the state's theory continues all the way to Monterey, California. She does borrow gas cans from Daryl. But then again, that doesn't make any sense either, right? You're on this covert mission. You can buy gas cans and no one will be the wiser, right? But you borrow gas cans because you say you're going to Utah. I don't know the way. Gas may be more expensive, what have you. She's not familiar with the route. So she borrows gas cans. As they often did, you heard Daryl Brewer say, as they often did on their road trips. It wouldn't make any sense as far as this covert mission goes, right? Well, what else happened in Monterey? Did she just do that and nothing else? No, something else happened. You saw weeks ago some receipts. Receipts for various things. Gas. Gas cans. But what happened in Monterey in terms of those receipts? Now again, we're on this covert mission, right? We don't want to be detected. Don't want to be detected. What does she do? She goes to the bank. Remember now, she has two different accounts with Washington Mutual. She has a business account and she has a checking account. So what does she do? She deposits some money into one account. She deposits money into another account. Notice one account ends in 8006, one ends in 7148. She deposits $400 in one, $300 in the other. And we also have a deposit in 237007 of $100 into 7148. So as we look at exhibits 237005, 237006, and 237007, what do we have? Let me make sure you can see them all. What do we have? We have transfer of money between accounts, right? And Well, Jodi Arias wasn't a rich woman in June of 2008. She had a balance in one account of $548, and she had a balance in another one of $207. So she's got what? $750, right? She's moved around. She said some of it was for business purposes, some of the trip was for personal purposes. That's why she moved some of this money around. Okay. Well, again, if you're on this covert mission, why do you do these banking transactions, right? Why do you do these banking transactions and leave a trail of where you're at? And keep in mind, they're all in Monterey, right? Monterey, Monterey, Monterey. All in Monterey. She didn't do this back in Wairika. She didn't do this back on May 28th, did she? Remember, keep in mind, on May 28th, right here, this plan was in action. A gun was in her hands and she was working on the rest of it. She didn't pull out any cash, right? We saw, and we'll talk later as we go further on this journey, this trail. She didn't pull out a bunch of cash in late May or any time before she came. Because remember, she had enough, $750. She wanted to do this covert mission. She simply could have gone there without the need for gas cans. You know, when you buy gas with cash, you don't have to give your personal identifying information. We heard that makes sense, your own common sense and experience. And we also heard that from the lady who works for Tesoro. You pay with cash. There's no need for a receipt. They don't take identifying information. So she had this $750 or so, and she doesn't take it out. She could have put it in cash. She doesn't do that. She wanted to buy gas cans covertly. What could she have done, right? She could have gone into Walmart or Target or wherever, bought gas cans, and walked right out, right? No one even the wiser. She wouldn't have a witness. She wouldn't have a witness who she borrowed gas cans from. But again, if you're on a covert mission, that doesn't make any sense to create this witness to save $20 or so. $12.96. The state said yesterday $12.96 is the price of premeditation. Well, $26 seems like a small price to pay to cover your tracks if this is what you're doing. Now, what does she do here, though? She does buy some gas cans, right? The next stop in this trip is we know that she stopped in Salinas, California. And looking at Exhibit 237008. What does she do? She buys a gas can with cash. Now keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the state says that this was done by this smart woman under the premise that she did the calculation that she needed another gas can to get into Mesa, Arizona without being detected. Of course, we know she had the money to buy gas without being detected, without there being a paper trail. She had that money in the bank, so that doesn't make any sense. But here's the other thing that doesn't make any sense. She buys this extra gas can, right? And here she is with this receipt. Well, I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but I've never been to a Walmart that doesn't have a garbage can. Why wouldn't this smart woman, why wouldn't she just take this receipt and drop it right in the garbage? I don't want anyone to know I bought this gas can because I'm on a covert mission. Drop it in the garbage. She didn't do that, did she? It doesn't make any sense. Then there's this theory, this receipt has been bandied about. This is evidence that Jodi Arias lied to you, right? That's what the state said. She lied to you on the stand. And the light of truth. And we'll talk about shining the light of truth on some people that have been involved in this trial later. But she doesn't throw it away. And she says she returned the item. Did she ever say she returned it to the exact Walmart? You can go back to your memory. She was in Pasadena. She was in different places. There's plenty of places where this happened. But the state says, oh, look, we checked all the registers at this Salinas, at this Walmart. Did they check the others? Do they know? Who knows? But again, set up a house of cards and knock it down and call her a liar. Because that's the basis we're going to use for our case. And look, ladies and gentlemen, if Jodi Arias were accused of the crime of lying, I could not stand before you in good conscience and say she's not guilty of that crime. But nowhere in your jury instructions are you asked to convict Jodi Arias of lying. There is no verdict form that you will have to say, is Jodi Arias guilty of the crime of lying or not? Well, of course she is, but there's no verdict form to that regard, because that's not the crime she's being charged with. It's premeditated murder. That's the ultimate crime. Okay. Now, the other thing that happens in Salinas is the state made this comments about the license plate, right? This gang of skateboarders that need a screwdriver to be in the gang, right? That was the comment. That was the facetious nature of this theory. Jodi Arias told you, and there was all this discussion, all this cross-examination. How was the license plate leading? How was it, the front plate, everything else? What Jodi told you is that she saw the plate reflecting, she picked it up and she put it in her car because she thought it was her front license plate. There was no talk of the back license plate. No talk of it. Now, what the state brought forward to you yesterday seemed to be this theory that at some point in time, what Miss Arias did to avoid detection was remove the license plate. Remove it. So she wouldn't be detected. Well, that doesn't make any sense. What would draw the eye of a law enforcement officer more than a car with a plate missing? Probably the next best thing that would draw the attention of a law enforcement officer would be a license plate that was upside down. Right? We heard about that. Officer Galletti from the West Jordan Police Department said, I noticed it because it was upside down and for no other reason. Doesn't make any sense that Jodi would have put this plate upside down if she's on this covert mission. Remember, she's still trying to be undetected. She's trying to go to Utah to set up her alibi. So, that doesn't make any sense either. But let's back up the car, literally and figuratively, right? Because the next point of conduct that is important here is Pasadena. Miss Arias goes to Pasadena. And one of the things we see is that she bought gas. And of course, it'll be the last receipt I pull up, but we can see she bought gas in Pasadena. Here we go. Pasadena, California, she buys gas. Now that receipt is definitely faded over time. Let's see here. Exhibit 237.011 and 237.013 and 237.012. She buys gas. Okay. When did this gas purchase occur? June 3rd, 2008. So So on June 3rd of 2008, Miss Arias is in the midst of a covert mission to Mesa, Arizona, designed with the single-minded purpose of killing Travis Alexander. June 3rd. She had all that money in the bank. She doesn't take it out. And she goes to an Arco in Pasadena, June 3rd, about 8:42 in the evening, and she buys gas. She makes 3 separate purchases for gas. One of them right here on the right, boy, that's a debit card. That can be traced. Gee whiz, that doesn't make any sense if you're on a covert mission, does it? And of course, she kept the receipts. Well, that doesn't make any sense if you're on a covert mission to keep these receipts. When she filled up her gas cans, and keep in mind, when we talk about all this, you know, the state says, oh, it's positive. She had to have 3 gas cans because of the amount. But they haven't provided you a lick of evidence as it relates to how much gas that Ford Focus holds. Not a lick. Those calculations are based on nothing. But okay. She creates this paper trail. She buys all this gas. What else happened on June 3rd, 2008, that evening? Remember, something real important happened that evening. All right? She spoke with Ryan Burns, the man who she was going to go see in the Salt Lake City area. Now, keep in mind, in terms of lies, part of what the state has said is, you didn't know you were in Salt Lake? Well, you know, she was in some suburbs, that sort of thing. Call her a liar. She didn't know she was in Salt Lake. She was in West Jordan. She was in a suburb. She didn't know if she was in Salt Lake. Call her a liar. It's another example. But here she is. She's on the phone with Ryan Burns. And yesterday, keep in mind, yesterday the state says Ryan Burns, no motive to lie. No motive to lie. And he talked to Jodi Arias that evening. Around 9:30, he said. And you recall me asking him, there was talk about, when was Jodi expected up there? When was she going to be in the Salt Lake City area to West Jordan? About 12 hours. We talked and she said she'd be there in about 12 hours. That would have been about, you know, he said the conversation was around 9:30, 10 o'clock. That would have been about 10, he kept saying 10 or 11 the next morning. The morning of June 4th. She was expected in Utah on the morning of June 4th about 10 or 11 in the morning. Now, getting back to what I asked Mr. Burns, I asked him, when you talked to her, did she say anything? Did she make any excuses as to why she might be late? No, she said about 12 hours. Well, ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't you think if someone was on a covert mission, and that covert mission was about 5.5 to 6 hours away from her current location, from Pasadena to Mesa, she was going to eat up 6 hours just getting there, right? Wouldn't you, and you know, there's this talk about Ryan Burns being her alibi, etc. Well, wouldn't you tell this person, you know what? I may stop at the Grand Canyon and take some pictures. I may stop somewhere else and take some pictures. I may decide to pull over and take a nap at a rest area. Set up an alibi. Get yourself to the point where you're not expected till, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon, right? She didn't do that. 12 hours. She's expected in Utah, in Salt Lake. 12 hours. Doesn't set up any sort of alibi. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. So far, as it relates to this theory of premeditation, we really have things that don't make sense on this covert mission. We have one fact that admittedly, I'll admit to you, looks bad, right? Her phone goes off somewhere near Pasadena, California. And it doesn't get turned on until somewhere near the Hoover Dam, a day or so later. Okay, but that fact in and of itself, taken alone with all these other things that don't make any sense, could be seen as suspicious, but it's also probably the case that throughout the course of history of cell phones, that Jodi Arias would not be the first person to have a cell phone die on them and not have a charger available. She probably won't even be the last. Now, we have her in Pasadena. We have her talking to Ryan Burns, not setting up an alibi. And you saw the call records that she was speaking with Travis Alexander. What happens next? Showing you Exhibit 36. This is Mr. Alexander's office. Remember that Jodi told you that on the morning, what would be the morning now of June 4th, about 4:30, 5 o'clock-ish in the morning, she arrived at Mr. Alexander's home. And he was on the computer watching videos on YouTube. And the videos were of people dancing with boxes on their head, moving their hands around. And there were several of these videos, and we saw that recently, just a couple days ago, even when Detective Melendez testified. We went through that computer report. And it showed all those videos. And this is another example of one of those house of cards to try to call Miss Arias a liar. She never said that there was pornography. The defense never said it was pornography there. Jodi Arias told you there were people dancing with boxes on their heads. And that's what Travis Alexander was doing when she arrived at his home. Now the implication was made, maybe he was expecting her, maybe he wasn't. But we know there was phone calls. Jodi certainly told you he was expecting her. And if he wasn't, and keep in mind, of course, we're supposed to believe, and we'll get into that a little more later, we're supposed to believe that he's so scared of her, right? He's afraid of her. So my goodness, how could she just walk right in the house and then sleep with him, sleep in the bed, and then get up and take pictures of her? He's so scared of her, he's taken naked pictures of her in his bed. That is a new level of being scared. But anyway, let's go back to 4 in the morning. In the office. There they are. What Jodi said is that Travis had his back to her watching these videos. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's keep in mind here. This plot began back in May. And there she is. Under the state's theory, she's got the gun. We also heard the state say yesterday that she had the knife with her. They don't give you any evidence to support that, but she said they had the knife with you. So she has the implements of Travis's destruction in her hand. His back is to her watching the videos. We know he was watching the videos. And we also know, right, that she's in Mesa, Arizona, and that she's expected in West Jordan, Utah, now about 6 to no more than 7 hours later. Because it's almost 5 in the morning. Now, wouldn't you think, ladies and gentlemen, somebody is on this covert mission. They've done all these things to prepare themselves for the moment in time when she could kill Travis Alexander. Did she shoot him right then and there? I mean, she had the gun, she had the knife. Why wouldn't she do that? If that was her point of being there, why wouldn't she do that? God, that doesn't make any sense, does it? And then what do they do? What do they do next? We heard about drinking some water and Travis wanting to have some sex, and Jodi was too tired. But what do? They go to sleep. And they wake up in the early afternoon. Now, I will admit there's no support for the idea that, there's no evidence that they slept. Nobody took pictures of them sleeping, etc. But it certainly makes sense. He was up till almost 5 in the morning. She had been driving all night. And we have pictures taken later that afternoon. The sexual rendezvous, right? At 1:30 in the afternoon. The theory, or the question arises under this theory that the state has perpetrated to you. They're in bed together sleeping. She's got the gun. She's got the knife. He's asleep. What better opportunity would somebody need? He's asleep. You put the gun to his head and you do it. You put the knife to his throat and you do it. If that's what you're there to do, isn't that what you do? No better time than when he's asleep. She doesn't do that. Okay. What next? Well, you heard Jodi tell you that they had sex that afternoon, that he was tied her to a bed, and that they took pictures. Well, we have evidence of those pictures, right? We have pictures of Jodi naked on the bed. Then it begs the important question. Keep in mind now, under the state's theory, Jodi is there to kill Travis Alexander. Why, if somebody is there to commit a murder, do you hang out and let the intended victim of this murder take pictures of you at what's going to soon to be a crime scene? Here I am at the crime scene. Go ahead and take pictures of me. No problem. No problem at all. Now, that doesn't make any sense, does it? And we'll look at some of those pictures perhaps later. But keep in mind as well, in some of the pictures, this man who is in utter fear of Miss Arias can't even see her head or her face. You can see the despondent look on her face in some of these pictures. But keep in mind what was taken on June 3rd when she's on this mission. A picture from her own phone that she took in advance of being in Mr. Alexander's house. Another exhibit, 638, a picture that she took on June 3rd, 2008. If you're on a covert mission and you've dyed your hair and you've done all this in order to get there and kill Travis Alexander, why are you taking pictures of yourself with this hair color and allowing him to take pictures of you with this hair color? All right? Doesn't make any sense. And not only pictures, nude photographs. And not only nude photographs, but graphic depictions of her genitalia. Doesn't make any sense. These are the last thing you would want if you're there to commit a homicide, a murder, is to have pictures of yourself taken. But that's what happened. There's no dispute that that's what happened. So now, keep in mind, and I will just show you Exhibit 164. Keep in mind now, this photograph was taken at 1:42 and 53 seconds. Jodi Arias, nude, on the bed, You can see her face. And you can see the time. 1:42. And that's important, ladies and gentlemen, because keep in mind now, by 1:42 in the afternoon of June 4th, Miss Arias was due to be in Utah. Really already, right? 10 or 11 in the morning. Even if we cut it an hour or so for, lag time, resting, bathroom breaks, whatever, she's already due in Utah. And she lets this man tie her up, and Utah is supposed to be her alibi, keep in mind. Tie her up to the bed, take nude photographs of her, and she doesn't shoot him and drive off and say, oh my goodness, I got lost or whatever, make up some excuse to lessen the hours. But she didn't. Right? She didn't. But this was the plan under the state's theory. This was the plan to kill him and get to Utah as an alibi, right? But what do we also know about what happened that day? We know that Jodi Arias sat around, hung out with Mr. Alexander in this office, and that he threw some CDs. Now, yesterday, the state postulated to you that she knew she was going to Mesa to see Travis. That's why she brought the CDs. So let's back up that forward focus again. Remember what you heard in Pasadena was that she was going there, and Darrell Brewer told you his sister had just had a baby. She was going there to take photographs of this baby, and you heard she always takes her laptop and her photographs with her when she does these sort of projects. But also, again, keep in mind now, if you're there and you're going and you're leaving your home and you're going to pack everything up and you're going to kill this man, why would you go and pick up a bunch of picture CDs and show him pictures of your travels together? It doesn't make any sense, right? Not for this covert mission, it certainly doesn't. But now we have the photographs, right? In the afternoon. Travis Alexander in the shower. The state postulated to you yesterday that this was it. That she had convinced Mr. Alexander to get in the shower. That they had had sex twice. She kind of wore him down so that he was naked and vulnerable in the shower so she could take her shot. Right? That was what we heard yesterday. That was the point. That was the plot of all this, right? And we know from the photographs that this happened at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And keep in mind now, the state has theorized throughout this case that Jodi Arias had the knife and the gun with her in the bathroom. She had Mr. Alexander naked, vulnerable in the shower, and she was waiting for her moment in time. Yesterday, you saw the picture of Mr. Alexander sitting in the shower. We saw the top half of that in Exhibit 159, right? You see the water dripping off his face. We saw that a few moments ago. And then there's the next photograph where he's sitting in the shower. They say this is where she decided to make her leap, to make her move, while he's looking at her. God, funny thing is, it seems like is what we have in Exhibit 142. We have Mr. Alexander right there, don't we? He's in the shower. Look at his head. Face completely against the wall. Arms up. vulnerable, still naked. Under the state's theory, that would matter, but be that as it may, there he is. Now keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this is at 5:22 and 36 seconds. She's waiting for a moment in time to strike. She's waiting to kill Mr. Alexander. If there's a moment in time, this is it. This right here is it. There he is. He's worn out, he's naked, and his back's to her. His eyes are right against the wall. He wouldn't have seen it coming. Wouldn't have seen it coming for an instant. And keep in mind, she had the gun, right? She could have just shot him right there if that was her plan. She didn't. Doesn't make any sense if this is a premeditated murder. And keep in mind, too, this isn't just a moment in time. 5:22 and 36 seconds. 5:22 and 54 seconds is the time on Exhibit 143. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like it's coming in better on the screen to your side. But what do we have there? 5:22 and 54 seconds. So I'm no mathematician, but it appears we've got about 18 seconds of time. There are 18 seconds between these two photographs. It wasn't just that one picture, that one moment in time, that 1 second where she didn't have time. Seconds later, he's still there. Showing you Exhibit 144. This, ladies and gentlemen, you will see, this happened at 5:23 and 0 seconds. Same guy, head still against the wall, near the wall, not looking, at 5:23. More time. More time. Again, if this was the time, and keep in mind, boy, ladies and gentlemen, by this time, this has been a week or more of plotting. And there he is. She doesn't do it. The saga continues with Exhibit 153. Same guy, same shower. 5:26 and 56 seconds. Exhibit 154, 5:27 and 12 seconds. There we go. 5:27 and 12 seconds. So, ladies and gentlemen, what you're being asked to believe when we look at these photographs in 142 and the last one at 154, what you're being asked to believe is that 5:22 and 36 seconds, right? 5:27 and 12 seconds. Now, certainly we don't know. Maybe he made some other movements, that sort of thing, during this time period, the other photographs. But there was 5 minutes in time where he was making these poses, right? 5 minutes in time. And my goodness, going back to what I said before, wouldn't this be the moment? Wouldn't this be the pinnacle moment? The gotcha moment? No. It wasn't, because she didn't do it. She didn't do it there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take the morning recess at this time. It is 10:24, According to this clock, please take a 15-minute break. Remember the admonition, you are excused. The record will show the jury's left the courtroom. We are at recess. Counsel, please approach.
Please stand for the jury.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Mr. Nerman, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, before we took our break, you and I were talking about the moments in time, matter of fact, for several minutes in time, when Mr. Alexander had his back to Miss Arias with his hands up, and sometimes with his face against the wall. Thank you. And those moments in time passed without Jodi implementing her plan. Doesn't make any sense. We get to this moment in time here. 5:29:20. He's seated. You can see that. We saw that earlier this morning. But this, according to the state, what we see in picture, photograph number 160, this, according to the state, is the moment in time Miss Arias chooses to implement her plan. 5:30 and 30 seconds. The Mr. Alexander is nude. Concede that. Vulnerable, so the state says. Although it seems highly less likely, because keep in mind, here he is right here. Seconds prior, he's looking at Miss Arias. Certainly would have seen it coming. His hands are up. But it is at this moment in time, the state says, that Miss Arias decides to put her plan into motion. She's stolen the gun. She's dyed her hair. She's rented the car. She's altered the license plate. She's got her gas cans. Everything is built up to this moment in time. That's what the state wants you to believe, right? And remember, before we talk about this, the testimony of Dr. Horn. Now, certainly it varied, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about lies and that spotlight of truth. But Dr. Horn says the wound to the vena cava came down to up. Down to up. So what we're to believe now then is that Jodi Arias, with all these chances in other moments in time, all these different chances when his back is turned and his defenses are down, that she somehow decides to get low to the ground and reach down and stab him. Stab him. Stab him. Doesn't that raise a question? Remember now, here's this big guy, strong guy, working out, getting ready for his trip to Cancun. Stab him. Jeez, you wouldn't think you'd stab someone unless you didn't have a gun. Wait, the state's theory, she didn't have a gun. She had a gun. Wait. So she chooses, and keep in mind now, and we'll talk about the change in story of the state's events, but keep in mind, the state went to great length throughout this trial to say, you betcha, no doubt about it, Jodi's a liar. She stabbed him first, and she stabbed him right there in the shower. Down to up. That's what happened. Apart from the logistics of that not making any sense, and you can judge for yourself how high off the ground Travis's chest is in that picture. Why don't you shoot? Why don't you shoot? You've got a gun. This is what you've done. You've stolen this gun. You've gotten to this point in time. Why don't you shoot? Doesn't make any sense. Under this theory of premeditation, none of this makes any sense whatsoever. Now the theory goes on as it relates to premeditation to say, well, Jodi did this fantastic job of covering her tracks. She tried to clean up the scene. She threw a little bit of water around. She drove up to Utah. And she hung out with Ryan Burns. And she made phone calls and she sent text messages to Travis to try to make it look like she wasn't there. And then they go on to say, and we'll talk about the stories in a minute, but this story of self-defense, that's a great big lie, right? That's what they say. But if it's a great big lie, you think that might be what you did. Or you might do something else way smarter than what Jodi did after this took place. She's planned this out, remember? A week or so in advance. She spent all this time on the road, all these hours, thinking about this moment in time. And you're saying this smart girl doesn't think of what she's going to do afterwards? Smarter things? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And why, if it's this pre-planned murder, again, do you create this crime scene of chaos? We had a relationship of chaos and a crime scene of chaos. And there is a correlation there. And we'll talk about that later today. But let's think about that. It doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense as it relates to premeditation. Not a single thing. Well, now, what we just spoke about is self-defense. Jodi Arias told you another version of events. You have an instruction on self-defense. I'm not going to read that to you, but I want to emphasize a particular portion of that to you as we go back through the history. Because the history is such that what Jodi Arias told you on June 4th, 2008, is a product of a lot of things that happened beforehand. And when you assess the self-defense claim, you assess it, and looking at page 13 of your jury instructions, if at the very bottom, a couple things. Looking at this burden of proof, the state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act with justification. If the state fails to carry their burden, then you must, it's not optional, must find the defendant not guilty of the charge. Now we begin at the last line of page 13. If there have been past acts of domestic violence against the defendant by the victim, the state of mind of a reasonable person shall be determined from the perspective of a reasonable person. This person right here, who has been a victim of those past acts of domestic violence. So, what are those past acts and how do we define domestic violence? Because I think that kind of goes to the history of the relationship and the realities that were in Miss Arias' mind when she approached Mr. Alexander's home on June 4th. Domestic violence means any act that is an offense. Assault. We have an assault in this case. Was Jodi Arias the victim of an assault? Well, we heard several occasions where that took place, right? Well, we heard of at least 4 distinct occasions. We heard Miss Arias being thrown down and held down and not being allowed to leave a room. Actually, and that's unlawful imprisonment, aside from an assault. Double bonus for Mr. Alexander, assault and unlawful imprisonment. 2 acts of domestic violence. Did he endanger her with these acts? Sure. Slapping her, kicking her, aggravated assault, kicking her, breaking her finger. Now remember, there's been much made of this finger, right? When we talk about this aggravated assault, state says to you, my goodness, this didn't happen. This happened on June 4th. And we can tell it happened on June 4th because on May 15th, looking at Exhibit 452, that your, Miss Arias, your hand injury is invisible. So the state inquired. They said, see, you're a liar, Miss Arias. They even showed Exhibit 453, a hand hanging down. There's a close-up, say no visible signs of the injury. Again, the house of cards. Set it up, knock it down, call her a liar. It's what you got to do when you don't have evidence of premeditation. But keep in mind, you saw Jodi hold her finger up. You saw it broken. And you saw Miss Wilmot stand right next to Miss Arias. You saw that up close. And Miss Arias' hand draped over her. You saw that. You can assess for yourself the visibility and the apparentness of that injury. Assault. He kicked her. Held her down, wouldn't let her leave. Threatened and intimidated her. We saw that in all the text messages. Exposing her was going to be the worst thing that ever happened to her. He was going to expose her to everyone she knew, right? Public vilification. Sexual assault. What about that? We heard about that in what I would say is 2 different ways. Now, Miss Arias, and we heard a lot about her psychology at that period of time. And we saw tables, and we won't go through those again, where Miss Arias had real low self-esteem. Didn't think too much of herself. So it makes sense then, when Travis Alexander places his penis inside of her while she was asleep, and she kind of says no and pushes off and continues the act, doesn't want to break the vow of chastity. She doesn't consider that a sexual assault because they'd already done other sexual things before. She didn't say no at the time that he entered her. But the law tells you, and the definitions are there for you, that somebody cannot consent to sexual activity when they're asleep. That's just the bottom line. That is a sexual assault. And we have the instance on June 4th, don't we? Where Mr. Alexander, and you have your definition of sexual assault, grabbed Miss Arias, put her arm behind her back, bent her over the desk, and had rough vaginal sex with her. She says, it wasn't that big a deal because I didn't say no. But why didn't she say no? Because it was a better alternative to his anger, to his wrath, to his hit. It was a better alternative. She submitted out of fear. Fear of physical violence. That's a sexual assault. Now, you're also to consider in terms of the relationship, you have to consider things in the relationship as far as domestic violence. The type of relationship, the length of the relationship, the frequency of interaction, and if the relationship has terminated. Type of relationship, regardless of whether they call themselves boyfriend or girlfriend or not, whether they use that distinction. The relationship was a sexual one, romantic one. Whatever label you want to use, it was that type of relationship that we're talking about here. Romantic or sexual. The length of the relationship. Again, it began in the fall of 2006 and ended tragically on June 4th, 2008. The sexual portion of the relationship didn't begin right away because, you recall, Miss Arias had a boyfriend. She didn't want to be unfaithful to this boyfriend. She saw the relationship going nowhere. She broke up. But of course, in between there, keep in mind, Mr. Alexander was bringing Mormon missionaries over to the home to talk to Miss Arias and to try to bring her into his church. And another way to do that, of course, in terms when we talk more about domestic violence relationships with Alice and Violet, but that's a way of pulling Miss Arias out of the relationship she was in. She was in a sexual and romantic relationship with Darrell Brewer. But if you start to begin to follow the tenets of Mormonship, you have to metaphorically grab her and pull her away from that. And tell her she shouldn't be doing that before marriage. Of course, he redefines that later, but he pulls her away. And of course, as a Mormon girl, from what we know of Deanna Reed, you're not supposed to tell because that's a sin. He'd already done that once. He knows how to do it, and he knows that they'll keep the secret. The frequency of the interaction of this nearly 2-year relationship, pretty frequent. I mean, she was maybe his backup booty call. Maybe some days she was his first string booty call. Who knows? But there was this frequency of interaction, right? And if the relationship has terminated a length of time, unfortunately, as I said before, it terminated on June 4th. It never terminated before that. Not really. Because even when she moved back to Wairika, they still talked. They still had phone sex. They still chatted. They still did instant messages. They still did text messages. They did all sorts of things. So when Miss Arias goes to Travis's home on June 4th, 2008, she does so, going back to what I started out this morning, with an element of fear, with some lies being attacked, and we'll talk about those a little while longer because, again, that spotlight of truth. Keep in mind, this relationship, and sometimes lies bleed into dirty little secrets, don't they? Was a dirty little secret. She goes there with fear. She goes there with the lies, the dirty little secrets. She goes there with an element of love for this man. Because let's face facts. And certainly one of the things that we talk about when we talk about premeditation is that she always loved this guy. And there's no evidence to the contrary. But she goes there. Fear, love, sex. Well, there was sex that day, right? All those elements. All the elements of the relationship of Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias that began with sex. That began when he gave her the Book of Mormon and wanted oral sex. It began on other occasions as well. It went overwhelmingly interwoven from Ehrenberg to the home of Chris and Sky Hughes, to Travis's home, to her home in Palm Desert. It's all a woven tale for which geography is irrelevant, and love, fear, sex, lies, and dirty little secrets is pervasive regardless of where we're at. Regardless of where we're at. So, Miss Arias tells you that on June 4th, she arrives at the home. We talked a little earlier today about how he was watching YouTube videos. how she went to sleep, how they woke up, how they had this sex. And she told you how his bedroom we've seen so many pictures of, but how his bedroom, what is seen in Exhibit 249, and bathroom, how that became a crime scene. She talked to you about that, didn't she? Now, of course, the state says she's a liar. That nothing happened the way she said it happened. But ladies and gentlemen, there is some elements of objective evidence that show you exactly that what she is saying is true. Obviously, we have the computer evidence, right? She says what time you got there. We have the pictures. Now, another lie the state believes that there's another lie here, right? That before she arrives at this soon-to-be crime scene, she is lying about her abuse. That she was never a victim of physical abuse. Never. Why? Two reasons have been proffered by the state. One, because she never wrote it in her journals. She did not say, "Dear diary, Travis smacked the crap out of me today." She didn't say that. She didn't say, "Dear diary, Travis ejaculated on my face today." She didn't say that. She didn't say, "Dear diary, Travis choked me until the point I passed out." She didn't say that. She didn't say, "Oh, he slapped me upside the head in the car because I wanted to move back." She didn't say that. That shows that none of these things ever happened. And oh yeah, she didn't write, "Hey, dear diary, I saw Travis masturbating to an image of a child." And she didn't call the cops about any of those things. So therefore, she's lying. Again, it's another one of these house of cards because it seems to set up this premise as it relates to the journals anyway. That there's this requirement that a journal be complete. You know, he's asking Miss Violet, well, the journal's not complete unless it details everything. Well, I guess logically that's true. That's an unprovable premise. So she didn't write down every time she went to the bathroom on January 24th when she said nothing noteworthy to report. She didn't write all these other things down. And so therefore they didn't happen, right? I don't know what laws of journaling or what rules of journaling the state thinks apply here. But that's nonsensical. Because she's not required to do it. And guess what else? You know, the state had an expert up here. Well, one day she called herself an expert, one day she didn't. She might have been right the first day when she said she wasn't. But later she claimed to be a domestic violence expert, right? Janine DeMarte, 1 year of experience. Well, of course, she counted her time as a student. So if you count all those years, it was a lot more. But, 1 year license, she's out there and she says, she had this experience in domestic violence and actually administering questionnaires is what she did. But she said, what we all know, really common sense, is that battered women lie, right? They don't call the cops all the time. Alice Violet told us the same thing. They don't call the cops. They don't make a report. Like Alice told you, a vision out. Imagine, someone's in a relationship for 10 years. They have 2 kids together. The guy has a good job. And he gets drunk and he hits the woman, right? According to the state's theory, and she doesn't report because she doesn't want him to lose his job. She doesn't want to get into trouble. She thinks it's a one-time thing. And she doesn't report. Now, under the state's theory, under the state's theory, that woman was never hit because it wasn't in a police report. Well, let's shine the light of truth on that, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? How much sense does that make? That woman, she didn't report it. She wasn't hit. Come on. I mean, come on. That is repulsive. Now, the state said yesterday that Miss Arias was implying that Miss Arias is trying to victimize Travis Alexander all over again by coming up with this theory that he's a pedophile, right? And then she caught him looking at this image of a child. Well, let's go back to that same doctor who claims all this experience with her 1-year experience. She was asked a pretty basic question. I think even with 1-year experience, she could answer it. She was asked, what is the definition of a pedophile? And Dr. DeMarte said something to the effect of someone who has a sexual interest in prepubescent children. Okay. State says there's no evidence. No evidence to support that. That's not true. That's not true. On May 10th, 2008, you heard about 45 minutes of a phone conversation about Travis Alexander. And what was said during that phone conversation? Now keep in mind, obviously, the state's trying to write it off as a heat of the moment type of thing. But when Miss Arias has her orgasm, whether real or fake, according to the state, any woman who's faked her orgasm is a big liar, and nothing she ever says should be believed. She's a fraud. But putting that aside, there's this idea that after this orgasm is heard, after Miss Arias articulates this, Travis Alexander says, "That's so hot. Your orgasm is like a 12-year-old girl having her first orgasm." Who says that? You cannot write that off to the heat of the moment. That is sick, and that is wrong. You can't put any spin on that. You don't say that unless you have that interest. And keep in mind something else. He doesn't just say it once. Oops, I screwed up. She says, "What'd you say?" Out of shock. "What'd you say?" And he doubles down. It's like a 12-year-old girl having her first orgasm. Let's hope, ladies and gentlemen, that he doesn't know what that sounds like. But he said it, and he said it twice. The fact that it doesn't say, "Dear diary, I saw Travis masturbating to an image of a child," doesn't matter. You have Travis Alexander's own voice saying this. And wait, one more thing, right? He doesn't just double down, he goes for the trifecta. He says, like corking the pot of a little girl. He said that. Not Jodi Arias. Had Jodi Arias really been interested in this vicious attack of Travis Alexander, even though the state has contemplated to you that, she was craving the media, and she did these interviews, and now, therefore, she's craving the media. She's throwing Travis Alexander under the bus. Gee, wouldn't it make sense? You've got the national spotlight upon you. You're hoping not to go to trial.
Objection, argument, facts,
And
Sustained.
Ask that it be stricken.
Stricken.
you have this camera in front of you. You have Inside Edition. You have news shows. You have all kinds of people that want to interview you. And you don't say it. She didn't want to tell Detective Flores that Travis Alexander had these interests.
Objection, argument, facts, not evidence.
She didn't want to tell anyone that he had these interests. If she had said, if this was a big plan, and if this was her plan to throw mud on him, she could have done so when she talked to Detective Flores, right? She didn't. She could have done so when she talked to Inside Edition. She didn't. She could have done so when she talked to 48 Hours. She didn't. It is a reality of this trial. It is a reality of the facts. And it is a reality of how this abuse came to be. You know, the state says, well, he didn't abuse Deanna Reed. He didn't abuse, and I would suggest, even though they say that, I think that's probably not completely accurate. Because while they had some consensual sex, it was going against their religion, and I'm sure that was damaging to both of them. But he didn't abuse Lisa Andrews, and he didn't abuse Mimi Hall. So therefore, he's not an abusive guy. But the relationship wasn't the same, right? She knew his secrets. She knew of his interests, hopefully an interest he never acted on. She knew his dirty little secret, and she was his dirty little secret, wasn't she? Because remember at this point in time on June 4th when she's pulling up to this home and this soon-to-be crime scene, Travis, his sexual, apart from what we just discussed and the comments about a 12-year-old girl, the state's right. There's nothing wrong with having sex as a young adult. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong or illegal about the intercourse that he had with Deanna Reed. Nothing. But it was, and there's nothing wrong with the intercourse he had with Jodi Arias. At least the time she was consenting to it. But there was something wrong with it within the context of the church. And at this point in time, when they begin a sexual relationship in 2006 that goes all the way up to 2008, he was a one-time offender, right? He'd already violated the dictates of his church. One time. He needed to keep that dirty little secret that he was having sex with Jodi Arias. Because there could have been ramifications. He was a repeat offender. He would have been a repeat offender. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. So the relationship was different. The need to control her was different. For those reasons. What did we also hear on this tape that is demonstrative of this relationship? We heard Travis Alexander engage in what Alice LaViolette called character assassination, name calling. Whatever place you want to put it on the continuum. Remember at the beginning of the tape, before the sexual portions got played, you heard Mr. Alexander talking about Mr. Abe Abduhadi. And he talked about a confrontation he had with him. Well, not a confrontation per se, because if you recall, and if you choose to listen to this in your deliberations, Mr. Alexander says that he intimidated him in the bathroom. He was a jealous guy. Hey, I gave him the I'm going to whip your A vibe. Says something to that effect. I'm going to whip his ass because he kissed my girlfriend. Jodi says, he wasn't the girlfriend at the time. I don't care. I intimidated him in the bathroom. Jodi says, he said nothing but nice things about you. I don't care. I was going to whip his ass. He's a violent guy, right? He had a punching bag, and you saw the exhibits. He had a punching bag in the hallway outside his office. Maybe he needed that for when Jodi Arias wasn't around. I don't know. But he was also a big fan of the Fight Club, right? Cage fighting. Bleeding. Broken bones. Cage fighting. And we have him being violent on this phone call. And we have him assassinating the character of other individuals that were associated with Mr. Abduhadi. Remember this reference to Team Freedom. She talked about, I may go to a Team Freedom event. Of course, Mr. Alexander probably knew that Mr. Abduhadi was a part of this and wanted to stop any perpetuation of any relationship. Maybe that was his motivation, I don't know. But he says those people are soulless. Those people are soulless. They're the worst. They don't care. They just want to drink and party, and they're terrible people. He's assassinated the character of other individuals, hasn't he? Those people on Team Freedom. It's all consistent. Character assassination. We saw it, right? We heard it. Whore, slut, three-hole wonder. The only thing you're good at is giving blowjobs. Things like that. Bitch. And Dr. DeMarte, in an effort to try to, save face with her, what appeared to be scripted testimony, says that's an inappropriate communication pattern. Something to that effect. That Mr. Alexander had an inappropriate communication pattern. Seriously? Inappropriate communication pattern? Who wants to be called a slut, whore, bitch, and three-hole wonder? That's beyond inappropriate. But all those things, the fear that she'd experienced in the violence before, the love she had for Mr. Alexander, the sex, the lies. Keep in mind now, the lies. Sure, Jodi lied. But Travis Alexander lied as well, too, didn't he? Not only we heard Deanna Reed talk about how he lied about having sex, he would lie by omission, and the state made a big deal. If Jodi Arias didn't confess to everyone she talked to, she lied by omission that she killed Travis, right? Mr. Alexander, Miss Reed tells us, when people would ask him about his virginity, he just kind of shrug it off and laugh, make it look like he was still a virgin when he knew he wasn't. He lied. He lied when he told that Jodi Arias was a stalker. We're going to get into that a little more later, this idea that she's a stalker. She wasn't a stalker. Look, if she was a stalker, right? Why do you take a picture of your stalker naked on your bed? So fearful of Jodi, his stalker was Mr. Alexander, that in Exhibit 393, on 11 of 2006, he sends a picture of his penis. How fearful of his stalker is he if they're using Exhibit 434? If he attends prepaid legal functions with her? How fearful is he of this stalker if, as they do in Exhibit 432, they go to the Sacred Groves, a sacred historical site in New York, a sacred historical site to the Mormon Church? How scared of his stalker is he if they go to the balloon festival, as we see in Exhibit 431? How scared is he? How scared is he in Exhibit 435? When while still in New York, they travel to Niagara Falls together. How scared is he? You see, ladies and gentlemen, part of the reality of the situation with this whole idea is that Miss Arias was a stalker is that it was a facade created by Mr. Alexander in case she ever got caught sneaking in or sneaking out. She's crazy. She won't leave me alone, that sort of thing. That's why she's over here at 2 in the morning. That's why she's over here at different hours of the night. But ladies and gentlemen, we know there was a continued sexual relationship, and it was an out. It was an out for him. Maybe Travis Alexander had fear that this would be exposed, not only affecting his status of the church, but maybe, and probably wrongfully so, maybe he feared that his friends would lose respect for him if they knew that he was engaging in this behavior. He had to come up with some sort of ruse in order for this behavior to continue. And we know it was a ruse because we know he took pictures and had Jodi Arias over, and this idea that, we don't know if she was welcome over there in the house on June 4th. He was taking pictures of her naked on the bed. You don't do that with your stalker. So this sex, the love, the fear, the lies, and the dirty little secrets all culminate on June 4th. Unfortunately, what happened is that Mr. Alexander's bedroom became a crime scene. Now, Jodi Arias told you that she was taking photographs. And we don't need to go over through all the photographs again. We saw the photograph we were talking about, a couple of photographs, Exhibits 159 and 160, if I remember correctly, about Mr. Alexander sitting in the shower. One we see his face, one we see his body. The argument you heard yesterday was the photograph of the body sitting in the shower was not accidental because it was in focus. Doesn't seem like a photograph anyone would particularly take, but it makes sense. Jodi Arias said she was holding the camera, she was looking at some of the photographs, deleting some, deleting others. It makes sense that she could have been holding the camera steady and accidentally took that picture. Okay. So we're at this moment in time, and this is when things differ, right? Up to this point in time, we've talked about facts that are entirely consistent, for which there's no real dispute, at least in terms of what happened. What to make of it, there could be dispute. But this moment in time, right, about 5:30, this is the pinnacle, right? Where the state says Miss Arias, who already has a gun, reaches down and stabs in an upward motion. And that after this happens, sometime after this happens, we have Exhibit 161. One of the photographs that was recovered, right? Jodi Arias says, and it's certainly coming in a little clearer today over there, 5:31 and 14 seconds, and you'll have a chance to have this back with you. But Jodi Arias says she drops the camera. This photograph is entirely consistent with that, isn't it? It's a photograph up towards the ceiling. Jodi Arias says Travis Alexander yelled at her for dropping the camera. He called her stupid. He says even a 5-year-old could hold a camera. Now remember, this is a budding professional photographer who loves photography and who takes great pride in it. He's attacking her at her core, insulting her. Miss LaViolette talked about those kind of insults, right? The I guess they'll hire anybody type of insults. Attack her right at the core. Even a 5-year-old could hold the camera. You're stupid. And then he jumps out. And then he attacks. And then he holds her down. And she remembers that on a previous occasion when he held her down, he had choked her to the point where she lost consciousness. Now, granted, yeah, right, there's no diary entry. But you still have the right to believe or disbelieve what she says. But she remembered that time. And she thought it might go further this time because the instances of violence were becoming more frequent and more severe. She feared that it might go farther. This time was different. He was angry. He was angry in a different way. She talked about getting out from under there. And you or your fellow jurors who aren't here anymore, ask her some questions about this area here. The bathroom. Where everything was. Where everything happened. Where was the camera? Where were other things? And Miss Arias walked you through various places where the camera was, where she remembered it to be. And she told you about the fear she felt. And again, I'm not going to read your self-defense instructions, but the fear she felt at that time and the reasonableness of the action she took are to be assessed from her as a prior victim of domestic violence. Sexual assault, take your pick. She tells you that after she gets out from underneath him, she runs through the closet. She tells you that while in the closet, she remembers from her experience as a maid to Mr. Alexander, not wearing the French maid outfit, but cleaning for him, that he had owned a gun. She tells you, showing Exhibit 69, let's start with Exhibit 69. She says, I grabbed the gun off the top shelf. And we learned from Detective Flores' measurements that if we believe the shelf to be the same as it was for 5 years ago, that it's about 7 feet tall. And that's where she says she got the gun. Maybe it shows up a little better in Exhibit 70. She grabs the gun. She runs through the closet and grabs the gun. Now, you recall it wasn't that many days ago, Detective Flores was on the stand saying that he didn't measure the height to any of these other shelves when he went back in there. Remember, he said that he put them in the identical position that they were on June 4th. And he measures them, and he measures the top, and he measures the ceiling, but he doesn't measure any of these shelves. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that the state is postulating to you is the idea that Miss Arias is lying because a closet right there that day, at that point in time, on June 10th, 11th, 13th, when Mesa Police Department was processing the scene, that nothing's disturbed. Therefore, there's no way it could have happened the way she says it did. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, there's no real evidence to show that. We don't know if she could have stepped on the shelf, to the side, to one of the railings. We don't know. She testified as best she could remember, but we don't really know. But one thing we do know when we look at this closet is even though we don't know the height of all the shelves, one of the things we know, we see a lot of shirts there, right? And they're lower. And for Detective Flores, Miss Arias is about 5'5". You've seen her stand up. It's probably about accurate. And this smart woman, if she was lying and making this up, boy, it would seem a lot smarter to just say, oh, the gun was at hand level. It was under one of those shirts. It was behind one of those pairs of shoes. It was somewhere where I grabbed it easily. But she didn't say that. Not only that, but we've seen evidence this crime scene is cleaned up. Could she have put a shelf that was dislodged back into place? Yeah, she could have done that too. So it would just be super simple if Jodi Arias was lying about this to say the gun was somewhere else. There's bags there. There's all kinds of areas where she could say I grabbed the gun from. And as a matter of fact, if you look at Exhibit 69 and 70, she pretty much picked the most inconvenient location she could have, right? If this is a lie, she picked the most inconvenient location she could have, the very top in the corner. Okay. Now, Jodi Arias told you about how once she grabbed this gun, she ran out towards the bathroom. Drawing your attention back to Exhibit 249, we see how she was able to run through and run back out the other way. 2 openings to this closet. She grabs the gun. She backs out, right? Per her story, she has the gun in her hand, and she's running away. Travis Alexander is still charging. Now, there was some discrepancy. She told Miss Violette she shot him in the closet. Well, certainly there's no evidence of that, and there's no evidence that Jodi Arias even said that. Alice Violette said, oh, that was my mistake. Because I'm not as concerned about things that happened on June 4th. I'm there to... Okay. So Miss Violette tells you, well, I might have been mistaken, my notes were wrong, that sort of thing, right? There's no evidence that Jodi Arias says I shot him in the closet. But to say it again, build the house of cards, call it a lie, and knock it back down. Okay. So Miss Arias backs out of the closet, points the gun at Mr. Alexander, and shoots him as he's leaping towards her. Now recall the entrance and exit of the bullet wound, right? Dr. Horn, yesterday, or actually 2 days ago now, we had the long day. He was saying, oh, the bullet never penetrated the brain. And then he says, oh, I made a mistake on my report. That was a typographical error. Or that it really did. But we see the trajectory, this right from the left cheek to the right nostril, right? As he's diving. He says it couldn't have been the first wound because it would have immediately incapacitated him. But now here we go. The light of truth, right? Right here. Let's shine it right here. Because you heard during this trial, Detective Flores testified. Detective Flores testified at a hearing in this case in 2009. Said the gunshot was first. I talked to Dr. Horn after the autopsy, which happened in July, and he told me the gunshot was first. That's what he told me. Gave me his opinion, his opinion, his opinion. Then he sat up there and told you, well, I wasn't given my opinion. Keep in mind, this other proceeding was sworn testimony. And we went back and forth about the importance of being accurate. I wasn't inaccurate. It was a misunderstanding. And Dr. Horn said, I didn't talk to him the next day. We know Detective Flores had testified that he did. Right? That he wrote that in his report. So, somebody's not telling the truth. Now, it perhaps is not fair to shine the spotlight completely on the detective when Dr. Horn should be sitting next to him so the spotlight can get them both. But somebody's not telling the truth there, right? And when the detective went through and relayed all these things about, the shot first and what happened next, again, shot first, and then Dr. Horn comes forward and says, no, the shot was last, he was already dead. It was never my opinion that he was shot first. I never would have said that. So again, somebody's not telling the truth here. But when you assess that, let's think about that from the standpoint of what happened. The chain of events. Because at a certain point in time, and you heard the doctors talk about that point in time, after 2009, there's at various points in 2010, Miss Arias tells what happened. She tells this story, and then lo and behold, all of a sudden what the detective testified to about Mr. Alexander being shot first, all of a sudden that's wrong. And there's no way that I said that. There's no way that this happened. Shine the spotlight, ladies and gentlemen. Lies. Somebody's lying here. And in this case, it isn't Jodi Arias. Okay. So she tells you he dives like a linebacker and takes her down. The gun goes off. He falls on top of her. And he's on top of her. And he's been shot, and he says, "Fucking kill you, bitch." There's a threat there. Obviously, there was a threat there before, because he's chasing her. She was in reasonable fear that he was going to end her life. It's part of the reality, ladies and gentlemen, of this day, is that out of this scene, out of this picture, behind which many dirty little secrets were held, somebody was not going to make it out alive. It was either going to be Jodi or it was going to be Travis. Now, what Jodi told you after that is that after she remembers "fucking kill you, bitch," is not very much, right? She tells you that she has lost her memory. She didn't have it, perhaps, but she doesn't remember. And Dr. Samuels talked to you about fright, and how the hippocampus doesn't necessarily process those memories. She may never had them in the first place. And we talked a lot about PTSD, and we don't have to go over that again. We know all the tests. We know the tests were consistent. And we know that trauma is trauma, whether it was a bear, lion, tiger, or this mysterious gopher that was introduced a couple days ago. Right? We know that. We know trauma is trauma. And we know that she was attacked by two intruders or by Mr. Alexander. There was trauma there. And let's face it, going back to lies and things of that nature while I'm thinking about it, Jodi Arias has been wanting to get Mr. Alexander. Like I said before, she would have just said, "Oh, he attacked me, he's a pedophile, he's terrible." But she came up with this silly lie about two intruders to try to avoid the reality, to try to avoid the airing in front of these cameras of everything that was at one time a dirty little secret. See, one thing this trial did is it ripped the lid off all these secrets. And if Jodi Arias, I would submit to you, wanted to rip that lid off, she could have done it when she sat down with Detective Flores on July 15th or July 16th. One of the things, though, about this memory loss, you had some questions about it. It was referred to as the fog, right? And that she didn't have memories of what happened next. She told you about a couple things, though, related to her memory. She said she had, and I think it was in response to one of your questions, she had some vague memories of being on her knees and dropping the knife and screaming. And that she had some memories of the knife going in the dishwasher, but she's not sure, did that happen on a previous occasion or did that happen on June 4th? She wasn't sure. And you know, probably part of the argument you're going to hear, or that you have heard, is that this is just made up. That she remembers exactly what she did, and she's lying. She's feigning this memory loss. This memory loss was real. We went through the testimony. Dr. DeMarte, who tried to say lie every other word if she could about Jodi Arias, said, oh, if she would have remembered, she knew what she was doing, that's why there was, she knew there was blood on her hands and killed him, that sort of thing, right? She knew. It's feigned. It's fake. She's lying about it. Well, the problem is, if she were lying, again, if she were lying about this stage of events, this smart woman, if she's lying about this stage of events, we saw the closet, we talked about that, wouldn't she actually make up a lie where she remembered? Where she said, he chased me down the hallway and he kept screaming, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, you're going to die. Say anything like that? No. Could she have made up a story where Travis Alexander grabbed the knife and said, I'm going to kill you? And then dropped it, or she knocked it out of his hand? She could have done that, right, if she was lying? She didn't. She didn't. And the proposition put forward that, oh, she had years to think about this, and this is what she came up with. And this fog is part of this, right? This fog is not made up because ultimately it is instead an inconvenient truth. It would be much more convenient for Miss Arias to tell you the sort of things that we just talked about. To paint this horrific scene, right? Of what he did. She didn't do that because she couldn't. She couldn't. Now, whether the memories were there and never moved into the portion of the brain that stores them, or whether trauma prevented them from being processed, we don't know for sure, obviously. But we know that this is indeed an inconvenient truth. And keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, they say, oh, this woman's smart, she's planned her lies, and she's planned this crime for weeks, and now, by the time she's with Detective Flores, it's been months. And she comes up with, on the second day, she comes up with this lie about the intruders, that if you look at the evidence, it can't be proven, but it also can't be disproven. That'd be a pretty good lie, right, for one night. If you were lying and you had 2 years to think about it, like I said, I think you'd think of something better, right? You'd think of something better. And here's the reality of the situation, ladies and gentlemen. The one thing that is clear. This scenario of Jodi Arias being forced into doing something, forced into defending her life, between what we see in Exhibit 159 and what we see in Exhibit 162, is a much more plausible scenario than premeditation. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this happened, and this shows, we talked about how premeditation doesn't make any sense. The pictures of him with his hands against the wall and his eyes turned away from this area. We talked about how premeditation doesn't make any sense. This, ladies and gentlemen, the theory of self-defense is one that is so much more plausible because it happened like that. Something happened. We have to face the reality, as much as the state doesn't want you to believe it, that something happened in this moment in time. These few minutes between 5:29:20 and 5:32:16. Something happened at that moment in time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take the noon recess. I would like to take 1 hour today rather than an hour and a half. Does anyone need more than an hour for lunch? If so, please raise your hand. 1 hour. We'll see you back at 1 o'clock. Please remember the admonition.
Please stand for the jury.
We are in recess.